couple of weeks ago, I shared a tip about cutting Minky straight, and there was tons and tons of questions about it. So I'm actually having a problem with this Minky backing, and so I actually want to tell you why and help you figure out why stuff like this happens. And this very same problem can actually happen with a cotton backing or really any kind of fabric, fleece, whatever anyone uses. So part of this is, you can see from the seam is right here, and you can see the rest of this quilt is nice and flat, right? Well, over here, from where the seam starts all the way to the end, it's drooping really bad. And one of the ways that I'm going to help that is I've clamped on this edge clamp from Red Snappers, which is really going to help me not get a lot of puckers under here or even cause the Minky itself to like bunch and gather. So I will, and I am quilting lines here. So after I get started with the channel lock, I am going to lift this up with my left hand a little. I'm not pulling it. You don't want to pull the Minky, but I want to lift that up enough to help it be a little more taut, a little higher with the machine, and then hopefully I'll be fine as I quilt down the thing. So one of the reasons why this is happening, and this happens when you piece a backing with a whole bunch of different scraps. It can happen if you rip a back and then sew it, or if you just don't cut it straight, or if you don't sew a straight line, like where the seam is can droop down. So this is mostly prevalent when the seam is running vertical. That's when I have the most problems with something draping. Sometimes I'll have a horizontal seam, which is what I prefer. But I'll have a horizontal seam that somebody's pieced like a whole bunch of scrap pieces, and let's say like this was one of them, that square, if it wasn't cut straight, it could be sagging, and then over here it could be super tight. It's so funny how randomly pieced backs with all different types of scraps can have one or two random squares that just droop, droop, droop. So it's so important to not fudge things in when you're quilting. Like, cut things straight and measure them and make sure that they're flat, and don't pull them as you sew. That's also part of the problem with this backing. Along this seam, the two pieces may have started out the same size, but it was pulled. And part of the thing with this, one of the reasons why that happens, is Minky like this, I don't know if it's just, this is definitely a different backing than some of the other Minkies. I don't know if it's the ones that just have a higher pile like this, because I've also noticed the Rosette Minky has a backing like this. It's so slippery. So when they're trying to piece it and line it up and keep things straight, it slips all over the place, and they're pulling it as they're doing it. And then also that can help create this sagging problem. And one of the ways that you can combat that is to pin it. Pin it, pin it, pin it, pin it a lot. And what I do is make sure you cut this piece and this piece to the same size, and then you're going to pin from, I actually like to pin the start and the end, the middle, and then do the pins in between. But you just have to make sure you don't pull it as you go. If it grows as you go, sometimes that happens because of the feed dogs. It might be good to use a walking foot. It's also good to get a half-inch seam, a full seam allowance, or full inch seam allowance, sorry, because your Minky will lay flatter. And the seam can actually open up and be completely flat. You don't even have to press it. And you actually have to be careful with some Minkies. If they're embossed and you press them, you'll emboss or press the emboss right out. So when you do vertical seams, this happens a lot when a quilt has to be pinned on with a vertical seam. one side's going to be tight and the other can droop. So if there's a way around you not doing a vertical seam, that's going to be so much better. Horizontal, horizontal, horizontal is my favorite. And I actually personally, when it comes to cotton quilt backs, I don't like the seam to be pressed open. The only time that I do is with like a Minky back. That's it. I like them to be pushed to one side, and one of the reasons is you're going to expose the seam and all the thread. Like I had one client whose stitch length was pretty big and she had her seam opened, and this was a long time ago. I didn't know it was going to do this, but as I'm quilting, I can actually see the batting because she had opened her seam. So press it to one side. If you want to cut some of the selvage off of the seam after you sew it, great. Do it after you sew it, because if you do it before you sew it and you don't cut it straight, then we get this problem. But it's so important to keep the selvages on if you can. I can't pin these selvages on because of that stretch. The stretch on Minky runs from selvage to selvage, and so that's why the two cut sides need to be pinned on. But with regular fabric, if you leave the selvage on, selvages are so straight, it's so nice to pin to the top leader bar and the back bottom leader bar so that you can just have a nice flat quilt, and it quilts great, and you're going to have a great end result. I think that's the most important thing. I can do what I can do, but you're going to have a better quilt if things lay flat. It's going to be easier to quilt. It's actually going to be more cost effective if it's done right. And I think, you know, you're going to be happier overall if things are straight and instead of wonky. So let me know if you have any questions. I am going to do a post about squaring up Minky. I didn't have a hand to hold the camera for this one, but I will upload more posts about Minky, and let me know if you have any other questions. I will say pretty quick, this Minky is fun to have something that has such a high pile, and the rosette Minkies are fun, and even the other textured ones that are embossed like the paisley one, but I personally prefer Minkies that are solid or the dot, because you can actually see the quilting, and then if you do have to piece, it's not super slippery like this one has been. So I hope these tips have helped, and let me know if you have any other questions.